Okay, left, right, out. We're May 12th. Another day of selling in the markets. Not that big. It kind of rallied at the end, but it was down significantly. All indices. Even bond yields were down. It's people are pushing money over there. There was a good 30-year auction as well. A lot of it flies in the face of what we assume to be logical. Which that's pretty much what the market is pretty much an illogical mechanism at this point. And as long as interest rates are manipulated, it will never find its true self in a sense. But here, we need to look at a different number that came out today, the PPI number, which I believe is 11%. That's a producer price index. A little less fluffy as a CPI, but it's still not on the up and up. But what it does tell us, and because we can look at the relationship between those two numbers, even if we can't believe the numbers themselves, right? So we can look at the relationship. What it tells us is that producers are facing inflationary pressures. Prices are rising for them. And if you took it at face value, the prices are not being passed on completely to the consumer. And what that tells us, and this has been the trend for some time now, and then what that will tell us is that inflationary pressures will continue on the consumer side of things in the medium to further on future, simply because these prices have to be passed on. Otherwise, cuts will have to be made or something. They have to maintain their margins. You can't just sell at a loss. And if you don't have certain margins in certain companies, you are just, you're going to take into the woodshed. Something has to give. So the PPI number, that's the way I look at that number. It's like, hey, if that number is hot, then we can expect it to be pushed down towards the consumer, and CPI should run relatively hot. But that CPI number, we need to get back to that because there's some interesting thoughts that I have on that number. Well, when you look at the actual, somebody posted on Twitter about real, like the food prices, the home prices, or the housing prices, the gas prices in the year over year increases there were all double digits, well above the 8-point-something%. And it begs the question, how are they, like I've said before, this number is pretty much fictitious at best. Excuse me. So it begs the question of what people are really feeling and what the real price increase is, and it's definitely not 8-something%. You look at the things that people actually need: food, housing, fuel, or energy to get to and fro, and to heat and cool, all cook or whatever. Various food, various essential items. Just go down the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there you go. Those prices are skyrocketing beyond. We're talking about anywhere from some up the gas fivefold of what that number 8-point-something% it really is, according to the actual what the government's reporting. So we also look at a month over, but then you got to look at the month over month increase, which I believe is 0.3%, which any positive number at this point is just compounding upon a greater or another positive number from the month before, which is necessitating just horrific. It's ravaging people that are in poverty already. It's ravaging anybody that it doesn't have the savings or doesn't have the ability to cut anymore besides, pretty much essential things, which there's a lot. But anyway, it's hurting people, a vast majority of Americans. And what that number, these numbers, I was going to say, so year over year and month over month, I like to look at those aren't trends. So people are like, okay, well, the month over month number is down. Is that peak? Well, you're comparing 1 month from a month 12 months ago. So I'm not going to compare the number, the year over year number to the month over month, or to the year over year month from a month ago, if that makes sense. I'll compare the month number to the next month number. So like we got the 0.3%. It's still up. I think it was 1.2 in the month before. But the weird thing about that number is we also seen the most significant price increase when it comes to transportation in April, and yet it doesn't seem to manifest as significantly in the number. But we can look forward to more of this stuff. And the only thing I could say is that if we get like the month over month, the year over year number that might be lower than 8%, that you might actually get a little bit of a rally. But that's on top of, I mean, we're talking about nominal numbers. That could be greater than the 8% if you look, it just, when it comes to nominal, but percentage-wise, less, because you're taking it from a larger number. So it's interesting, or at least on the month-to-month, and I'd imagine we're getting to that point where we're the year-over-year. I know that sounds all convoluted, but just you got to look at these numbers and you got to really delve into them yourself, because the media is lying their rear ends off, and they have been, and it's in concert. One, they don't even. It's unbelievable that most of these people that they have on there, and even the business networks, don't even understand what inflation really is, the root causation of it. They use it as a political mechanism, or you're listening to the same people. It's like, well, here's what I was thinking. I was like, how am I right? How have I been right? I'm not special. I'm definitely not the smartest person in the world. I mean, I'm above average intelligence, probably in the when IQ level, is fairly high, but it's not that makes me right. It's just simple common sense and being critical of the people that have been wrong multiple times. The reason I bring that up is because I was thinking about, well, one, Powell got renominated and confirmed. Two, guys that have been out there from the Fed saying that nobody could have seen this over the last 2 years. People saying inflation's good. There's no inflation. Inflation's good. Inflation's transitory. Inflation is, and we're just calling rising prices or whatever. But all the while creating inflation, and but in an unprecedented, almost biblical manner. So it's just common sense. And if back in the day, in roughly 2008 or whenever we had the financial crash, I took it upon myself to actually educate myself and read some of the people that get those things right, the Austrian perspective in particular, guys like Hayek, Rothbard, and Mises, and then contemporaries more like Ron Paul and Peter Schiff or whatever. I learning basic economic principles from them. And then you understand this isn't rocket science. This isn't hard to see. It is hard to time no matter what you do, but you understand the mechanisms of the underlying economy and how these things will manifest themselves. Now there's it's the whole thing's complete insanity. Now, what's next? Well, we haven't even got this party started. We haven't even gotten to QT. We haven't even gone above 1% interest rates. We're at 0.75% on the Fed funds rate, and the market is acting like this. So that's why I haven't rolled up any of my short positions. I've been writing this thing down. Even if we have some kind of pop, I anticipate it going further because, we haven't even started this stuff. The train hasn't even left the station. Supposedly the Fed's fighting inflation. We haven't even started that. But yet, the news outlet and the news media is saying that the Fed itself is doing whatever they can to control inflation, which they haven't done anything in relative sense. They haven't done anything. These little quarter, half-point rate hikes, they haven't even started the QT. They haven't gone serious. And some of these guys are almost asleep at the wheel, and it's very alarming to me that they're so naive when it comes to this. To think that they're not in a 1970s moment, that they, in order to wrestle this down. See, I think they're anticipating behind the scenes that eventually the demand destruction from inflation will somehow tamper down rising prices. But what they're not anticipating is the supply destruction as well that's happening here. And you're seeing that. And you see that manifest in shortages. You see that in not only, it's exacerbated by foreign policy and other things that the government's actually doing, but it is a monetary phenomenon as well. And I don't know what they're thinking, because of course they operate typically off the demand side. So, hence that's more their modus operandi when it comes to monetary policy. And that's why I'd rather have conservatives in there, to be totally honest, because at least they usually have even if they have a horrible monetary policy, they don't understand that very well. And they typically do what the Fed wants them to do, but at least they operate off supply side stuff, and they try to at least counteract some of the price increases by enabling businesses to do what they do best. Oh, last thing, so we'll leave that. So when you're concerned about gas prices and you hear Biden, Psaki, and all them, oh, we're doing whatever this, we're releasing this strategic oil reserve, which they inherently just came back and bought it again. Then you wake up in the morning like I did, and you see that they canceled the lease auctions for a significant amount of acreage in Alaska, and you've got to ask yourself, then at that particular point, if you haven't already, is this purposely driven? Because I know most people in Alaska wouldn't mind the jobs, wouldn't mind oil and gas prices going down up there, but you wonder why you constrain the supply from us, and then also from like Russia, which the landmass of that's enormous on a global scale. And then somehow we're surprised that oil prices continue to go up even when the market's down. And Biden and them seem to be totally oblivious. I think they think it's a good thing. Like we all have 40, 50 grand just lying around to go get a electric vehicle that to break the news to you, it still needs diesel energy to charge that thing, and and a lot of other things. You got to get the electricity from somewhere. But I don't understand it, and I don't understand why we haven't increased refining capacity over the last years, because I thought Trump was big on that. I thought we were doing that. Apparently we haven't. And also, I don't know why, if you're concerned about environmental issues or whatnot, in order to bridge that gap, we can't just flip the switch off and go electric. But in order to bridge that, why aren't we transitioning to more diesel output and using renewable diesel and biodiesel and all that jazz? But there is renewable diesel now, and investing in that stuff, because you can utilize this one. You can have highly efficient diesel engines, and also you can tow, or that's what primarily you're towing your freight with, is diesel. So a lot of this stuff, you wonder what, when things defy logic like that, that there's some kind of monetary incentive, corruption involved when it comes to politicians, and we're seeing that. Okay, another thing, the old Fauci deal. What if you haven't read the book by JFK? These documents regarding the compensation of NIH scientists with royalty checks in the circular loop from pharmaceutical companies and grant money and whatnot is no surprise to you. What is a surprise is the actual numbers coming out in these documents, and what it does is, if you haven't, stuff that we should have known a couple years ago, now we're finding out things that I've kind of known, but not into the particulars. And we're seeing the corruption within our own scientific community, in the government, and people that are willing. And now what you realize too is, when this stuff happens, when you realize they're lying, when they're hiding data because the Chinese tell them to hide it, certain genetic pieces of genetic code, that also came out, which we already been talking about that for years, but now it's confirmed. You wonder how these doctors and whatnot, and these other PhDs and all these people of reputation somehow went along with all this and didn't question it. And you start losing a lot of confidence in some of these organizations and even the private sector guys, and you realize that these are just human beings, and you can't worship some document that they've earned, or in some cases probably vaguely remnants of earning. And you realize they're human beings, and despite the knowledge they may have accumulated, they're willing to look past that in order for any kind of, sometimes a group affirmation or political and financial compensation. I don't know, man. Just, you need to look into that. Also, the 2,000 mules things, which I was wrong a little bit, I think, on that when it comes to some of the, which is a critical vulnerability, don't get me wrong, the electronic machines of choice, we're going to call them, so we don't get banned off things. But that 2,000 Mules documentary, detailing these people, and this makes a lot more sense, to be totally honest. One, they got the documentation and they can show it, and it's just in a small percentage, and even look at everything. And it's clear as day. But this goes along the lines with what the CIA and all these guys had learned in the past. And what has happened in the past, people don't realize, and I talked about this before, is that this isn't something new, hijacking elections. This happened, in the 20th century a number of times. And it's documented in a number of exposés about mafioso, and they talk about how they would run homeless people around to various polling areas, also control certain people that count, because that's what really matters. As Stalin would say, it doesn't matter who votes, but who counts the votes. But they've done that, and they've done it to the highest bidder, or people they think they can control, and sometimes it's people that they have stuff on. Kennedys were one of these. Kennedy's father, JFK, as much as I respect JFK, and I think there's a travesty, obviously what happened, their own government did it, but they got him in, and one of the reasons he got knocked off, according to, certain groups or certain people, deathbed confessions, and in documents and books and whatnot, is that the promises his father made to the mafia in particular, when they get him in, were reneged upon, and him and his brother went up to, and since the mafia and the CIA were also very close, and he had checked the CIA in a number of instances and was willing to possibly disband them, that you had this weird already embedded nefarious groups together that colluded and off them. But in some of these things, you realize that these two groups they knew how to do this. One, the CIA learned a lot from the mafia when it comes to setting people up and running these kind of things. Now, the one thing I think the CIA has taken from this and expanded upon these tactics is running running parallel narratives, so that you jump on something, like guys that are very critical. You'll jump on one narrative that can be easily, or maybe not so easily, but later on is determined to be false, and while the real one is still there and the real outcome, but you can let the media jump on this other one, and some people are just ill-informed, or they don't pay attention as much, so it's, these kooks, they can't possibly can't believe they believe this, and they set up their own straw men in a sense, and this other narrative that this is what these guys believe. So I guess we'll end it there, but watch the markets. I would anticipate now that Fed's gonna have to do something with the PPI data. There seems to be a long way to go, because we haven't even started in the markets. Not to say that we won't have some kind of, because there's a lot of if you're on the short side, there's a lot of money being made, especially if you had a lot of money to start with. It's making some people's lives, right? I just don't know who's actually coming in and buying this, because you haven't even started QT, and we're like this. Why would you be in the market catching this falling knife? Because we have a lot more pain to feel, and then there will be a time to buy. There will be a time to step in and get good companies, but it's not yet. It's not yet, and I don't know who's in the treasury market buying. I have my own suspicions that it's not necessarily, people that give a crap about whether they make money or not, that are trying to stave off any kind of rout in the bond market. Or it could be speculators that are thinking that the Fed's going to capitulate at any moment. I don't know, but the country's had a very precarious moment. The last, it's become very apparent to me that, man, I don't even recognize it anymore. But I haven't even gotten into social issues. We're talking about these other ones, but basically we're living in the most corrupt, from almost top to bottom, government that the United States has ever seen. And it's always been some level of corruption, but this is beyond the pale, which is what happens in a dying empire. Anyway, talk to you later. Peace.